As questionable as Naruko's methods of doing so were, she did win her wager with Tsunade. She managed to hit the Sannin, which meant she was forced to help Sakura in whichever way she could. Hence why on the morning directly after the duel, Sakura was lying down on a bed, with Tsunade hovering over her, and a hand glowing with chakra placed on her forehead. I wonder, what does it take to mold medical chakra? Sakura asked. Tsunade gave a light snort. Your question belies your ignorance, girl. There is no such thing as medical chakra. It's not a separate element like fire or lightning, or even yin or yang. Then what is it? Tsunade seemed to think for a moment and decided the best way to explain it was with another question. How are you so strong? Tsunade asked. Strong? I'm probably the weakest of all my classmates. But compared to your average human, you're undeniably strong. How is this? Do you happen to have more muscle than them? Sakura understood what Tsunade was getting at. No. You're saying that we manipulate our bodies with our chakra constantly, without even meaning to surpass normal human limitations. Indeed. It is no simple technique, but a result of being in touch with our own physical and spiritual energies. Through it, we ninjas become better at just about anything we set our minds to. But you can take it even further than that, and use chakra to perfectly control your own body. Or someone else's. Right now I'm controlling your own body and making it mend your broken bones in a process that your body already knows how to do, but would normally take it weeks or months instead of minutes. Sounds difficult. That is a massive understatement, child. Most medics, even those trained in medical ninjutsu, rely on medicine or herbs. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. If it works, it works. But to truly master medical ninjutsu requires more chakra control than any other discipline, as well as extensive knowledge of the human body. You can't aid a body in its natural healing process if you don't understand how that process works. So, how does it work? Tsunade laughed at that question. You're looking to become a medical ninja? It's not something you just pick up in a few weeks. To be good at it requires such a commitment, you'll have to give up on learning almost anything else. You simply won't have time to. But wouldn't the steps it would take to learn be useful for other things? Sakura asked, echoing what Jiraiya had said about learning the Rasengan. Yeah, but... Tsunade hesitated. Never mind. Far be it from me to discourage anyone from becoming a medic. There are way too many people in this world that learn how to take lives and way too few that learn how to save them. Another pause. However, I'd still like to know your motivation. To help Naruto in whatever way I am able. If that's the case, then you should just give up on learning medical ninjutsu. What? Why? Medical ninjutsu saves lives and even wins wars by returning combatants to the field. It doesn't, however, prevent people from dying in combat. You can only heal those who return from battle because they won or managed to flee. It doesn't do anything for those too stupid to know when to run away. If you want to help this Naruto, you're better off spending your time trying to convince her to run while she can. Or better yet, not fight at all. Even if we could run away, which Sakura doubted, I don't think I can convince Naruto to run. As Naruto had told Sakura what Minato had told Naruto, it wasn't in the blonde girl's nature to run away when innocent people were in danger. Sakura saw a flash of pain in Tsunade's eyes. Then you should just give up on her. You can't save her, no matter what you do. Back in another part of the building, Naruto was being treated as well. Look, I appreciate the gesture, but there really is no need, Naruto said. You got launched headfirst into a wall and nearly broke several bones. I'd say you need someone to look you over even more than Sakura does. Shizune said. No, I don't. I know myself and I recover fast. Unnaturally so. Probably has something to do with me being the QB Jinchuriki. Anyway, I'll know I'll be right as rain tomorrow. Well... Shizune hesitated. There is no harm in having someone check, surely. And to be honest, that's not the only reason I called you here. I understand you and my master have gotten off the wrong foot. Naruto snorted at that understatement. I don't need her to like me, and I doubt she cares about my opinion. She's healing Sakura right now. That's all that matters. All the same, it's important to me that you understand she's not normally so callous. And I think she was testing you. And I'm not sure whether you passed or not. Testing me? Shizune nodded. More than anyone, Tsunade understands the desire to protect someone, and how it feels to fail to do so. All I ask is that you give her a chance, nothing more. And that was the end of that conversation. Back in the other room. Stop talking like that! Not every ninja dies young, Sakura said. She should know, she had looked up the statistics. She continued in a more subdued voice. I mean, yeah, most do. But it's no guarantee. We might survive. Perhaps, but my point is that you shouldn't rely on medical ninjutsu to make that happen. You're far better off choosing a more direct way to contribute in combat. You think that will increase our odds of survival? No. It will mean that whatever fate awaits you, you'll get to share it. I think that's... better. It didn't take a genius to figure out what Tsunade must have been through to give that advice. I'm sorry, Sakura said. But I don't want to base my strategy off of the worst case scenario. Tsunade considered that. Here I am, just rambling on. I guess there is no reason to listen to the concerns of an old woman. Still, I'm curious about something. You two obviously care a great deal about each other. I know she'd do anything for me and I would as well. I believe you. So what would you do if you fail? Later on, out of curiosity, Tsunade would seek out Naruto to see what her thoughts on these same questions were. To that end, she invited her over for a drink, though given her age, she was limited to fruit juice. Naruto accepted due to Shizune's earlier request not to judge her too harshly. I've wondered that myself. Sakura had a nightmare she told me about, Naruto said, referring to Itachi's Genjutsu. She believes I wouldn't want to go on living if she were to leave me as well. And ever since then I couldn't help but think about that. I'd like to believe I'm stronger than that. Ino and Sakura would... Well, I think they would understand, but they wouldn't be okay with it. I'd be a ruined and broken vessel, but for their sake I'd force myself to continue trying. Tsunade's eyes were locked on her sake bottle. Sakura had given a response very similar to what Naruto had just now. She had asked other questions of the pink-haired girl as well. For their sake, huh? And what if you could undo it? What if there was a small chance your own failure could be erased? Tsunade had asked of Sakura. What if you could get them back? At the small cost of your humanity. What would you do? What would Naruto? Costing humanity? Sakura repeated. If you had to do something terrible, Tsunade had clarified. It's very simple, Sakura had said. Naruto is the best person I know. If she realizes what she's doing is bad, she wouldn't do it. She's a hero, and I'd like to follow her example. Later with Naruto. That's a bit of an odd question to ask, Naruto said. Please just indulge me, Tsunade said with a lazy wave of her hand. It's difficult. I'd sacrifice myself for them in an instant, but I have to consider what they'd want as well. They are more important than me, so if I'd have to do something terrible to get them back, well, even though I'd be the one to do it and the choice was mine, my actions on their behalf would taint them too. They are the best people in the world, they wouldn't want that. It would be hard and painful, but if I truly love them, I'd have to consider what they'd want. I ignored Sakura's wishes once before, Naruto said, thinking of Gaara. I won't make that same mistake again. Tsunade smiled. You two are quite a pair. Back before with Sakura and Tsunade, it seems to me like you're just putting her on a pedestal, Tsunade said. From what I've heard, you're as much of a hero as she is. I got lucky. Naruto is much stronger than me. You sound almost like... Tsunade trailed off. Well, it's a common belief in our world that only those with great power are capable of heroism. Isn't it? No matter how hard I try, I'll never be as good as Naruto, so I'll never accomplish as much. Well... sod it. Who am I to lecture you on this? Talk to Jiraiya. He was the runt of our little Genin team, and look at where he is now. Tsunade might claim to not want to lecture her, but she already raised a good point. Jiraiya started from humble beginnings and he got far. So you mentioned something about me learning medical ninjutsu? Sakura said. Weren't you listening? I mentioned why it would be a bad idea for you. Why bring it up again? I feel like I've hit a plateau when it comes to my genjutsu. I'm happy with the technique I developed and I don't see a way in which to improve it further. Not unless you wanted to go as far as Kurenai Sensei did and learn how to cast illusions with just hand signs and no required medium. But that seemed like a lot of work for a relatively small improvement. But I have to keep improving myself, Sakura continued to say, and this seems like it best leans into my talents. Oh, there were other options. She could ask Jiraiya to teach her Finjitsu, something he was supposedly a master in. But she feared that Rasengan training would be a precedent for her, that his style and her talents were just too incompatible. Tsunade, on the other hand? Other than being the best medic in the world, she was also known to be one of the few to have ever attained truly perfect chakra control. That, Sakura knew, was something she herself might realistically achieve in a few years. Tsunade was tempted to just brush her off, but then she remembered the wager she'd lost. She was to help Sakura in any way she was able. She sighed, and decided to give the girl a chance to prove she was serious. And in such a way that she wouldn't really need to do anything yet. I'm the best master of my craft, and a beginner doesn't immediately go to the world's best for lessons. Talk to Shizune first and see what she is willing to teach you. If you learn all she has to teach, then you might be worth my time. As Sakura had guessed, Shizune was a lot more accommodating. Not that getting Sakura started took a lot of effort on her part. Shizune just let Sakura borrow some of her old textbooks and told her to go study. Feel free to come to me if you don't understand something, Shizune said. I'll be quizzing you on those chapters in 2 days. I don't expect you'll have it all memorized yet, but I just want to see what you're capable of. Will do, Sakura said and bowed. Thank you for your help, Shizune-sensei. The older woman seemed embarrassed. That's going a bit too far. If you get your way, you'll be studying alongside me. Call me Shizune-senpai. Judging by her enthusiasm, Shizune had secretly wanted a little kohai. Sakura grinned and complied. Tsunade she still wasn't sold on, but her apprentice seemed nice, which in turn raised her opinion of Tsunade by proxy. And thus the next week would pass without much excitement on the part of Naruto and Sakura. Sakura started to study under Shizune, and Naruto continued to practice the Rasengan. Though considering there is no bet to master it in a week's time, there's a lot less urgency and stress on her part. Jiraiya spent most of his time around Tsunade, trying to see what kind of person she had become, and trying to convince her to return to Konoha. He wasn't getting a lot of success with that last part. At this rate, he seriously had to consider what would happen if he failed to convince Tsunade. The most excitement they saw during that week was Naruto causing an explosion during her training. All of them, including Tsunade, came running to see what had happened. They found Naruto lying on her back with her arms and especially her hands covered in burn marks. "What the hell happened here?" Jiraiya asked. Tsunade, meanwhile, went over to check the girl's wounds. While her hands and arms looked red, they weren't bleeding, so Tsunade's hemophobia wasn't acting up. Naruto groaned and winced. "I remember you mentioning something about how my dad came up with this jutsu? How it was based on the tailed beast bomb, right?" "So it is," Jiraiya said, already suspecting what this was about. "Well, back when I was using the Kyuubi's chakra and he allowed me control of the four-tailed cloak for about half a minute, I actually used the tailed beast bomb twice in that time. I was mostly going on instinct, but still, I did it. I figured that since I did it before, I could try it again with Rasengan. After all, one was modeled after the other, right?" "That was reckless of you," Jiraiya said. Naruto winced again, both from the pain and shame. "The tail beast bomb I used before was a long-range blast that didn't require me to stabilize the energy for very long. And that's exactly the part I'm having trouble with now. It just seemed like a smart idea at the time." "That's the exact opposite of smart," Tsunade lectured. "Do you know what the most common cause of death is for ninjas when there isn't a war going on? It's stupid shit like this. Young ninja who wish to experiment with their technique and end up blowing themselves up." "But how will I learn new techniques if I'm not allowed to experiment?" Naruto asked. "I don't see why you'd need to. Jiraiya is teaching you a powerful jutsu that's been proven to be safe. Just use that," Tsunade nearly shouted. Jiraiya, however, disagreed with that notion. The last thing he wanted to do was to stifle his pupil's creativity. "You're allowed to experiment, Naruto, but there are safer ways to do it." "Such as?" Jiraiya recalled how Minato used to experiment with dangerous jutsus. "Say, Naruto, have you ever heard of something called the Shadow Clone Jutsu?" "Yes, the time has finally come. Naruto will gain access to the Shadow Clone Jutsu." Though, since she will learn it so much later in her development, it won't become her go-to Plan A jutsu like it was for Ken and Naruto. Naruto has already developed her own style of fighting by this point. Instead, she'll use it like most people use it, which is more for the utility it offers, and not a raw muscle in numbers that it can provide. So now, please allow the storyteller to give his opinion on the Shadow Clone Jutsu, because as it's described in canon, it shouldn't have allowed Naruto to get away with half the shit that he does. The Shadow Clone technique, supposedly, evenly splits the chakra of the user among the clones, meaning if you make one, you've just effectively split the chakra you've got in half. If you make 100 at once, you're down to 1% of your original chakra reserves. And if you use the technique to summon a single clone 10 times, you've cut your chakra down to 2 to the 10th power, which is 1024. I don't care how much chakra Naruto has. The math of that technique would mean he'd run out extremely fast. That's just what you get when your technique has a cost in divisions instead of set subtractions. Now the simple fact remains is that Naruto doesn't run out of chakra that fast. And it might surprise you to learn that I do like the Naruto series. So I don't want to just eject the whole concept as nonsensical. And there are several ways to have this make sense, but all of those ways require a bit of headcanoning. Like by saying Naruto's chakra just regenerates really fast to 100% if he gets low. Or by retconning the jutsu and saying that rather than splitting your chakra in half, it instead takes a variable amount. I'm personally more inclined towards the former than the latter explanation, though both admittedly still have some problems. But to reiterate, the jutsu looks like a really inefficient use of chakra. Naruto didn't have anybody to explain this to him, which worked to his benefit since through simply using it a lot discovered that the same rules, not that I think he was even aware of those rules, did not apply to him. Naruto, however, does have someone to explain the jutsu to her and realizes what I have just told you. It looks like a horribly inefficient use of chakra, and she's not going to spam it for the same reason nobody in Dragon Ball uses their version of the clone technique all that often. splitting your powers in half every time you use it seems like a bad plan. And if she's somehow an exception to this rule due to unique Ninetales Jinchuriki related circumstances, that's going to take her a while to figure out. The only other thing of note for the girls is that Shizune appraised Sakura's aptitude for medical ninjutsu, which at this point boiled down to seeing how quickly she could memorize human anatomy, and honestly told Tsunade that she had promise. Tsunade didn't respond to this beyond a non-committal grunt of acknowledgement. So on the day it goes down, Sakura goes to visit Shizune for her assignment for the day, and finds her new senpai unconscious after she tried and failed to talk Tsunade down from meeting Orochimaru. Upon finding her, Sakura just screams for help, causing Naruto to come running. Naruto wanted to lift the woman into a bed to make her more comfortable, but Sakura stopped her. You shouldn't move her. The way she is lying down right now, it's exactly like the book describes you should place someone who's unconscious. Someone has already treated her. Or whoever did this didn't want to endanger her. The two girls discuss what to do and decide that Sakura should stay with Shizune while Naruto looks for Tsunade to help Shizune, or Jiraiya just to tell him what had happened. Of course she's not going to find either of them, as Jiraiya is unconscious at a bar after being drugged by Tsunade, and Tsunade is unavailable for obvious reasons. Given time, Shizune wakes up on her own, and Jiraiya shows up through the window almost immediately afterwards. Shizune at this point comes clean about everything that transpired between her master and Orochimaru. Jiraiya doesn't even stay to hear the full story. The moment he hears Tsunade is going to meet Orochimaru, he just starts running and gets Shizune to tell him everything on the way. Now, while Naruto doesn't really remind Tsunade of her younger brother, and to a lesser extent her old lover, I'm going to give her some credit and say that even without that, she still wouldn't take Orochimaru's offer. So all of that stuff up until Jiraiya's group arrives on the battlefield remains mostly unchanged. Considering the likelihood that they were about to jump into hostilities, Sakura made herself scarce and didn't join the others as they jumped into the field. Unlike Naruto, who was more of a juggernaut who had the raw power to bulldoze through most problems, Sakura knew she needed the element of surprise to make a difference. Kabuto being revealed to Naruto as a traitor isn't nearly as dramatic as in canon. She has only seen him that one time at the start of the Chunin exams when he was sharing his info, and didn't spend that time with him in the Forest of Death. Her reaction to him working for Orochimaru is a simple, "I'm going to make you pay for that, you fake," when she sees him injuring Tsunade. Naruto isn't that fond of Tsunade, but she is still clearly the good guy of this situation, and this is either her heroic inclinations kicking in, or just her impulsiveness, depending on your opinion. Naruto Uzumaki. I thought I might run into you again. Kabuto made a show of looking around. Where is the Haruno girl? Did she finally realize that being near you is only going to get her killed? Naruto gave an animalistic growl, but Jiraiya put a hand on her shoulder. Easy there. He's just trying to provoke you. If he's good enough to leave Tsunade in such a state, you know you'll die if you approach him recklessly. Then what do you want me to do? Shizune will keep Kabuto busy. You just have to sit back and watch me wipe the floor with Orochimaru, Jiraiya said, and then he and Orochimaru, the latter with help from Kabuto, used the summoning jutsu, and with a sap, Kamikichi would appear. Upon seeing this, Naruto decides that now is a good time to try the summoning jutsu herself, and this time she'd pour all she had into it. And this is where Naruto's all-around better education and chakra control really starts to matter. While she doesn't have more chakra than Ken and Naruto, her control means that she can get way better performance out of it. She doesn't need to brute force the technique with the Kyuubi's chakra to get something worthwhile. She doesn't quite manage to summon Gamma Bunta himself yet, but she does reach a tier just below that by summoning Gammaken. It's Gammaken because it's the only big summon that Naruto has briefly encountered and thus knows exists besides Bunta. The other toads don't count since I see them as being even harder to summon. Not bad, Naruto-chan, Orochimaru says from atop his own snake summon. It was a little larger than Gammaken, but not by much. If circumstances were different, I might have wanted to add you to my collection. He'd still choose Sasuke over her, but he'd still want her as a backup. The problem was that taking the Ninetales for himself would be like declaring war on the Akatsuki, which was something he wanted to avoid. The way you just talk about people as if they are things to collect just pisses me off, Naruto said, but made no move to attack. Jiraiya had said he'd handle Orochimaru and she'd listen to his orders for now. Besides, she was panting heavily from pouring all she had into that summon. Of course, this being Naruto, she'd be okay in a minute or two, but that was a long time as it was seen in battle. Orochimaru's snake attacked without warning and Jiraiya plus Gamaken moved to intercept. With Kabuto, Naruto might recognize he's probably more skilled than her, but she had learned that even the most skilled of opponents could be taken off guard. Naruto saw one of Sakura's butterflies come up behind Kabuto and grabbed a kunai. Kabuto smirked at her. "Don't do anything foolish," Shizune told her. The moment the genjutsu butterfly made contact, Naruto threw her kunai. Seemingly unaffected by the genjutsu, Kabuto snatched the kunai out of the air and in one fluid motion threw it towards the spot Sakura had been hiding. Though hiding was perhaps putting it too strongly. The long grass was the only cover Sakura had been able to find, and though small as she was, it only provided partial cover for her. And it had apparently not been enough, as she was forced to roll away to dodge the projectile. Next, Kabuto rushed for Sakura, whom he considered the weakest link. Konoha ninja, especially young ones, tended to lose their composure once one of their members went down, so this was just standard protocol for him. "No!" Naruto screamed and raced Kabuto for Sakura. She managed to reach her in time, but only because she had sacrificed control for speed, which resulted in her being off balance the moment Kabuto reached her. Realizing the dire strait she was in, she tried to jump away and get some distance. That blue glow around Kabuto's hands looked nasty, and she didn't fancy her chances with him up close. He still managed to briefly touch her leg. Still, she managed to buy herself enough time to launch a very rushed windjutsu, which blew the two of them apart. Because of how rushed it was, she hadn't been able to make the wind cut enough to damage Kabuto, so creating distance was all she managed. Naruto and Sakura were blown away by the jutsu and came to a stop in a mess of limbs on the ground. Kabuto, in stark contrast, kept his feet on the ground the whole time and smoothly glided over the grass until his momentum expired. He would have continued to press his advantage if Shizune hadn't also been present and trying to pelt him with senbon needles. Considering there was a decent chance that those senbon might be poisoned, he couldn't afford to let even a single one of them hit him. Naruto tried to stand up, but found that the leg Kabuto had briefly touched could no longer support her weight. Initially, Sakura offered her a shoulder to lean on, but soon Naruto improvised using her hair as a sort of cane to support her weight. "I get he could spot me hiding in the grass, but how could he have spotted the butterfly?" Sakura wondered out loud. She had made sure that it came from his blind spot. "It's quite simple really," Kabuto chose to answer. It had taken less than 10 seconds for Naruto and Sakura to regain their bearings. But in that time, Kabuto had already gotten enough of an advantage on Shizune to feel comfortable bantering. Tsunade's apprentice was currently on her knees, not far from her master and incapable of standing. "I indeed spotted you before, so I guessed what you were trying to do. Still, it might have even worked despite that, if I hadn't seen Naruto-chan's eyes briefly look at something over my shoulder." "That's it, just from a brief glance of my eyes," Naruto thought. She had assumed you needed some kind of dojutsu to be that perceptive, but apparently you could just normally become that good. "It's kind of sad really," Kabuto continued. "That summon of yours proves you've got some power, much more so than me. But you lack the experience to really utilize that power effectively, and it looks like you won't live long enough for that to change." Shizune tried to punish Kabuto's taunting by hurling a kunai at him, but it seemed he was still paying enough attention as he simply tilted his head to the side and it sailed past him. When Kabuto turned his attention back to her, he kicked her to the ground. This caused Tsunade to come out of her stupor and try to protect her apprentice. "Stay away from her!" From her posture though, Naruto could tell Tsunade was in no state to fight. She wasn't standing up to Kabuto. She wasn't grabbing a weapon. She wasn't even healing Shizune. She was simply using her own body as a shield. Amidst the adrenaline, the desperation and the chaos, Naruto couldn't help but feel a flash of disappointment. Tsunade had already destroyed much of the admiration Naruto had for her the first time they met in that bar, but still, Despite her questionable personality, Naruto had at least expected more competence from what was supposed to be the greatest kunoichi to have ever lived. Yes, Naruto understood very well how reason tended to leave you when those you love were in danger, but still. Anyway, Naruto still wanted to save her, and especially Shizune, who had been nothing but nice to him. So she focused on making the hand signs for a proper great breakthrough, modified this time with her cutting winds. She had to account for the people she was trying to save, since friendly fire was very much a risk with this jutsu, but her control was good enough. Or at least, she hoped it was good enough. Cutting great breakthrough! Kabuto's response to this was to jump back and use the earth wall jutsu for cover. This also effectively removed him from sight. Watch the ground! Tsunade screamed. That's how he got both me and Shizune! The ground? I can't exactly get away from... Or maybe... Well, she was already using her hair as a cane for one of her legs, wasn't she? She split her 2 ponytails into 8 thin strands, which she then used as makeshift legs to lift herself and Sakura off the ground like the world's weirdest spider. She wasn't a moment too soon either, since half a second after her feet were lifted from the ground, Kabuto burst from beneath it. Naruto had one hand occupied carrying Sakura, so all she had time for was to hastily slash at Kabuto with the kunai held in her one free hand. It cost her the arm when Kabuto managed to brush against it with his offensive medical jutsu. It seemed that every time they clashed, Naruto lost the use of one of her limbs. Sakura, while being carried by Naruto, was able to hurl a bunch of shuriken at their enemy at near point-blank range. Kabuto had to pause his advance to knock the projectiles aside, which bought Naruto enough time to send several tendrils of her hair at him. Since Naruto had been using her hair as legs to hover above the ground, and Kabuto came from beneath the ground, he was essentially trapped in a small cage made out of her hair. There was nowhere for him to retreat to except the way he had come, which was what he did. Tsunade saw an opportunity and slapped the ground hard enough to cause a miniature earthquake. This, as you can imagine, wasn't very fun for Kabuto. When he came back to the surface at a seemingly random spot, he was gasping for air and was covered in bruises and nasty looking scratches. The shockwave Tsunade created also caused Naruto to lose the fragile balance she had with her makeshift hair limbs and tumble to the ground. She shakily tried to climb to her feet, and again, Sakura had to help her up since she only had one functioning leg. Naruto tried to move the arm Kabuto had touched and found it similarly incapacitated, which meant that she could no longer make the hand signs required to use her winjutsus, which were her best tools against an opponent who clearly outmatched her in close-range combat. When Kabuto recovered enough to move, he again chose to target Naruto and Sakura. Whether because he considered them the weakest link, or whether because he actually considered them a dangerous element that needed to be removed, it was hard to say. With hand signs now beyond her, the only thing Naruto could try to do to stop him was to send her hair to intercept. But Kabuto was able to jump past it in a burst of speed, and at that point it was clear Naruto wouldn't be able to stop him from reaching her. Naruto knew she couldn't have outdone him in taijutsu even if she still had the use of all of her limbs. As it was now, there was truly nothing she could do. So all that was left was to try something she couldn't do. Naruto began to get her chakra in her one good hand and started to spin it for the Rasengan. She hadn't been able to do it before in practice, but it was her only hope. Sakura saw Naruto's Rasengan grow in power, but just like every other time, Naruto seemed unable to stabilize it. And the Rasengan began to sputter and send tendrils of chakra outside its neatly confined sphere, which was a telltale sign it was about to explode. Impulsively, Sakura reached out for Naruto's Rasengan and forced the chakra back into its proper shape and direction. Now, Sakura knew chakra theory. She knew just how much what she was currently doing was supposed to be impossible. You couldn't just give your chakra to another person. Chakra was a mix of the unique spiritual and physical energies of a person. You couldn't just use and mold someone else's chakra like it was your own. Not unless you had some special trait, trick or technique to allow you to do it. Sakura knew she had no such thing. Yet, Sakura had no trouble guiding Naruto's chakra as if it was her own. It felt like Naruto's chakra was downright eager to follow her directions. Ignoring the part of the technique that she had trouble with, which was generating enough power for it to be worth a damn, Sakura was able to focus entirely on the part that she was good at. And the exact same was true for Naruto, who now left forming the technique into shape completely in Sakura's hands, while she just focused on gathering as much chakra as possible for Sakura to work with. The Rasengan grew and grew in power to a point far beyond what it could have if Naruto had mastered the technique on her own. Even more than what it could have been if she had discovered the same trick with the shadow clones as Ken and Naruto did. The Rasengan grew so bright and large it nearly shielded Naruto and Sakura from Kabuto's view. Sakura's abilities were stretched to the limit. As for as good as she was at chakra control, she had never had to control this massive amount of power before, and it was doubtful she could keep it up for more than a few seconds. But that was all that they needed. When Kabuto had jumped, he had committed to the attack, and he knew there was no avoiding a collision. In desperation, he jerked his body so that he landed in the Rasengan with his feet and lower body, instead of with his face and hands. He gathered what chakra he could at the point of impact to minimize the damage, but it was debatable whether he would have been better off to just accept his lower limbs as a lost cause. Rasengan! Naruto and Sakura yelled at the same time, and then Kabuto was sent spinning and flying away by what I'd like to dub the BFF Rasengan. He bounced and rolled off the ground for several more feet before he came to a stop. His legs were a ruined mess of blood and bone. Kabuto tried to use medical ninjutsu to administer what treatment he could, but even with that, he would need extensive surgery to even have a chance to ever stand on his own feet again. Back with Jiraiya. Atta girls, Jiraiya thought. It seems I just keep getting lucky with my students, wouldn't you agree? He asked smugly. I still say she's a step down from poor Minato-kun. He would have done that without help, Orochimaru countered, mostly just for the sake of arguing. Even he had to admit, getting the best of Kabuto like that, even with help, was impressive. Now, I'm afraid I'm going to once again have to point to a questionable section in canon. In chapter 166 of the manga, Orochimaru claimed he left Ken and Naruto alive in the forest of death out of consideration for the Akatsuki. Which makes sense. Killing a Jinchuriki would get the Akatsuki even more upset at him, which no one with as much self-preservation as Orochimaru would want. Then, 2 chapters later, after Naruto successfully performs the Rasengan, Orochimaru seems to have completely forgotten all about that when he tries to kill him. It's presented as if thanks to Naruto's show of competence, and I quote, it would be problematic if the Akatsuki would get their hands on him. But if Orochimaru is even vaguely aware of what the Akatsuki intends to do with the Jinchuriki, that makes no sense. If he at least knows the relationship between the Akatsuki and the Jinchuriki is likely going to be antagonistic, having Naruto or Naruto show competence is even more reason to leave them alive. For as Kabuto would later point out to Sasuke in chapter 309, if they are strong, they might hinder the Akatsuki, which Orochimaru seems to want. Now, there are ways to twist this into making sense, but let's be real. Kishimoto just wanted Orochimaru to try and kill Naruto as a great character moment for Tsunade. That or just a retcon of the Akatsuki's goals. Or both. Now that I'm writing a story myself, I very much understand wanting to twist events in such a way as to get a better payoff. No judgment. That was indeed a great character moment for Tsunade. For me, however, it does mean that I'm a lot less inclined to follow along just for the sake of following along. So Orochimaru won't have a sudden desire to kill Naruto. His motive as not pissing off the Akatsuki holds true. The battle between Jiraiya and Orochimaru continues, but this time with a little less involvement from Tsunade than in canon, and one more decent summon on the side of Jiraiya. And with Jiraiya regaining more and more of his strength as the drug Tsunade gave him runs out, and Orochimaru not recovering in a similar manner, time isn't on Orochimaru's side. Not to mention that Kabuto is A, not in any state to help him summon Manda, and B, very likely to die from his wounds unless he is taken to safety soonish. While Orochimaru doesn't consider Kabuto invaluable, he definitely considers him valuable, and his loss, especially in Orochimaru's weakened state, would be a heavy blow. All of this just means that Orochimaru chooses to retreat with his injured subordinate a lot sooner. When Jiraiya rejoins the others, he finds Tsunade fixing up Naruto and Shizune's injuries. The latter had already cleaned the blood from the older woman's face, which made her a lot more composed. Can we go home now, Jiraiya-sensei? Naruto asked. For a short time, yes. Remember, we won't stay long. We'll be traveling, so you'll be harder to find. Jiraiya looked at Tsunade warily. Tsunade? He didn't need to finish the question. In return for saving my life, I will return to Konoha, and I'll lend my services to its hospital for a few weeks. However, I won't become the Hokage. I'm sorry, but you're asking too much of me. It was hard to say who looked more disappointed, Shizune or Jiraiya. And while she didn't show it on her face, somewhere deep down, even Tsunade was disappointed in herself. If that is so, then I'd like to ask something else of you, Jiraiya said. Yes, Tsunade looked warily at Jiraiya. Sakura, I want you to take her on as your apprentice. The girl in question perked up. I understand she's already approached you for this. I want you to accept and take her with you on your journeys when you again leave Konoha. Jiraiya had seen how Naruto and Sakura had been able to create a powerful Rasengan together. While the results themselves were impressive, what really got him thinking was a method. For Sakura to use Naruto's chakra as if it was her own, the amount of blind faith that required in each other was hard to imagine. This, more than anything else, convinced him that he needed to consider Sakura in any plans he made concerning Naruto. And Tsunade would be able to keep the girl safe as well as prepare her for the challenges ahead, far better than he could. After this, I myself, let alone the rest of the village, can no longer consider you a true Konoha ninja. So I'd like for you to pass your skills on towards someone that is, Jiraiya finished saying. These terms are acceptable, Tsunade said with a defeated expression, and that was that. Okay, so to explain, Tsunade's character development that originally resulted in her accepting the role of the 5th Hokage came from seeing the dream reflected in Naruto, which reminded her of the dreams of her lost precious people. Naruto, while a nice gal who looks after her friends, doesn't really share that dream in the same way, or at least not as overtly. Tsunade hasn't even gotten over her hemophobia yet in this scenario. But no worries, even if Jiraiya and Tsunade both refuse the position, I'm sure they'll still manage to pick someone perfectly acceptable. Oh boy.